I'm going to be going over some miscellaneous things that you'll need to do to complete your game. I'm going to go script by script for the most part. First off, the camera script. Okay, so after we've copied the camera script over from Canvas, this is the updated one. Make sure the name of the script matches what the name of it is in Unity. It must match. Now, we're going to attach the camera script to the main camera. And once we do that, we will see it down here. Set the target as the player, or set the player as the target. Let's type in these numbers for offset and smooth factor, although you might have to play around with those. This just determines how much the camera moves around the player, so the player isn't centered the entire time, and this controls the speed at which the camera shifts its position. And that's how we get our camera working with the updated camera sprite. Checkpoint script. So we have multiple checkpoints in our game. I dragged in a column, I renamed it to checkpoint. After copying the checkpoint script, let's go ahead and apply it to the checkpoint object. And since I already had one, I am just going to get rid of the duplicate. We should not have duplicate scripts. In fact, we should not have more than one script for any object in this game. That's actually a good point. I'm glad I did that. So remove component if we have that. Okay, click this if we have two scripts. We should not be having two scripts for any object in this game. Okay, now that that is there, we just need to select which sprites we're going to use for when the checkpoint first appears, like before we reach it, and what the checkpoint is going to turn into when the player reaches it. So I'm going to go to the sprites panel. I'll just drag in the column sprite for good measure, even though it's already set to the column. And whatever you want to turn into when the checkpoint is reached. So column and hat. Okay. Be sure to check off is trigger for the checkpoint as well, in order to get the script to actually work, and for us not to be blocked by the checkpoint, so we're able to pass through it. And that is the checkpoint. Going back to the scripts, the coin script should be all set from a long time ago. Now for the level manager script. We want to create an empty object called level manager here. Make sure it has that name. Then drag the level manager script into it. So we have a level manager object and level manager script. And it should be good here. That should be it. That takes care of the respawning for when we fall into the fall detector. Speaking of which, we should have a fall detector, which is an empty object that follows the player, which is followed by the camera. So yeah, within main camera, create an empty object, call it fall detector, edit the collider so it's a long rectangle. So this is always going to follow the player and the camera. So if the player falls off a gap, it will hit the fall detector. And by the way, if you look up here, you notice that it says fall detector tag. We are going to need to create 3 tags here. Click the plus sign to add a new tag. And we are going to have a tag for the player, the checkpoint, and the fall detector. Ignore any extra tags you might see here. So I will call one, player tag, which I've already done. You click save, and I already have that. And then you click one called checkpoint tag and fall detector tag. I don't think you can call it the same name as an object. I tried that, it didn't work, it just didn't allow me to create a new one, so you might have to just put the word tag afterwards. What are we going to do with these? Well, these tags are attached to certain objects, the ones that have their corresponding names, and the codes, some of these scripts, refer to them. So this gets things to work. So it knows to change the checkpoints because the checkpoints are going to have that tag on it. So I'm going to go to the checkpoint tag. Make sure the tag is not untagged. Make sure that's changed to checkpoint tag. Every checkpoint should have that. All 2 or 3 or however many you have. The player object should be changed to the player tag. And the fall detector should have the fall detector tag. And in the checkpoint script, it refers to one of the tags. Make sure that it is named after the player tag. It might just say player. It might say something else. Make sure it has the same name of the tag that you used for the player. And that should be good once we have that. Now, our goal, which is the magnet, in my case is the magnet. So I insert another object that the player is going to reach, and it's going to have the scene change script applied to it. So if I go into the scene change, I have to have the name of the scene I'm switching to. So if we have not created a new scene, we have to go ahead and do that. Okay, so my last video went over how to do that, so you can refer to that if you need to. I'm just not going to repeat the same thing in a second video, but just make sure that the name of that scene is here and there, in those 2 places, and the name of the scene is also right here. End screen. So it knows what to do. Oops. There we go. And then it should work. If your next scene isn't loading when you reach the goal, you just need to add both scenes. Click and drag them up. You just need to add them both up to here. This is indicating that our final version of the game, our final build, is utilizing these scenes. And something that has come up often, whichever term you want to choose, is the ground checkpoint. So I'm going to go over this again, but in order to only have the player jump when we're touching the ground, we have to create an empty object that checks for that. It has to check and see if we are actually touching the ground. So we create an empty object within the player, call it ground checkpoint, because that's what one of the scripts refers to, and use the move tool, move tool, to drag it down so that the bottom arrow, the horizontal arrow, is at the bottom of our player, like this. It should be at the bottom. We don't want it to be at the center because we don't want to check for the ground from the center of the player. We want to check from it from the bottom because the bottom is what's going to be touching the ground. So anyway, we go back to the player object. We look for the player controller script. We look for the entry for ground checkpoint because that's written in the code. And we drag the ground checkpoint option to there. For ground check radius, we want to copy the radius from the circle collider. If you have a polygon collider, you can try setting it to 5 or 6. If that doesn't work, then I recommend going with a circle collider, like getting rid of the polygon one and putting in a circle collider and just making it like this big, just to give us a definitive number to work with. So anyway, ground check radius. However, as you can see, I had to play around with that number a bit. That's a good starting point. If you find that the number you paste in there just isn't quite enough, you can increase the number, and I just increased it. Whoops. I went back too many times. I increased it to a very specific 0.64. 0.6 would have done just fine as well. And also, we want to set the ground layer to ground. If there is no ground layer created, we need to go up to Layers, Edit Layers. Oh, here it is. And create a new layer called Ground beside User Layer 8. So that has to be done too, or else this won't work. Set the ground layer to ground, and then it should work. And that's good. Any new script that we get from Canvas has to completely replace the old one. You're not doing something like this where we add it to the bottom. Okay, we don't want to do that. It completely replaces it. After you replace a script, you might have to change the name of it again. Okay, it's written in light blue. It's written beside public class because it can be modified in Unity. We have to make sure that the names match up. Okay, we shouldn't be having two scripts in one. That's something I've seen a lot. More, well, maybe not a lot, but more than I expected to see it. So we shouldn't have that. So if it wasn't clear before, it should be clear now that we have one script per object in this game, and we should not have multiple instances of the same code written in one script. Also, if you're controlling your player and it's tumbling over, what you want to do is this. You want to go to where the rigid body 2D component is, click on Constraints, and check off Freeze Rotation on the Z-axis, or Z, as the narrator says in that video, the Z-axis. So if you kind of do all this and things still aren't working, make sure you have one script per object. You have the latest script from the 2D game final steps page. Each name matches up, and so on and so forth. So after you do that, this actually isn't over yet. After you do all that, let's go to the animations. The animations are all taken care of in the player controller script. Okay, so here's a quick recap on animations. I'm going to go up to Window, Animation, Animation. We need to click the player object. We have to do that or else the stuff won't appear. So you might see a button down here somewhere if you never created an animation before. Otherwise, you can go up to this arrow and then go to Create New Clip. Okay, I'm just going to put them in Assets. Call this Idle, a new idle animation. What we're going to do is drag the sprite with its wings down, drag it with its wings up. I'm just scrolling down to zoom out, and then drag it with its wings down again. Space them out fairly evenly, and you can test it and to see what the animation looks like. Looks good. Looks great. Now I'm going to create an... Oh, I called this idle, didn't I? Okay, that's fine. Just rename it walk. Alright, and I'm going to call this one idle. And the idle is going to be of it just standing still. I'm going to create a new one called jump. And this is going to be with its wings up. And that's it. Well, for that. Now I'm going to go to the animator, Window, Animation, Animator, or it might be up here too. So I already have my animation set up here. This one that says player is actually the idle animation. Then we have walk and jump. So for each one, you have to right click and go to Make Transition. Connect the arrow to this. Okay, I've gone over this a number of times, so all I'll really do is say click each arrow, uncheck this box which says has exit time, and change the transition duration to 0. And we're going to go to the conditions down here. If we don't have conditions, like if we're unable to add any, we have to go to parameters and add a float called speed and a bool stands for boolean, which means true or false. Create a bool for on ground. So if we are going from idle to jump, we are not on the ground, so on ground is false. If we're going from jump to idle, that means we are on the ground, hence it being set to true. If we're walking, our speed is greater than 0.1. If we're not walking, our speed is less than 0.1. If we're going from walking to jump, on ground is false. If we're going from jump to walking, that means we are on the ground, which means on ground is true. Okay, we have to make sure those things are all set, and this thing is unchecked, and this thing is set to 0 for each of these arrows. If we do all that, then our animations should work. Hopefully this recap video has helped you a little bit. Hopefully it's helped to narrow down what it is you may have missed. That being said, go back and fix your game as best you can, and I look forward to seeing the finished result.